This podcast was brought to you by Meros Cryptocurrency. Meros is a cryptocurrency payment system that does what cryptocurrency originally intended to do. Be a practical and secure form of direct payment, Meros utilises the best of current technology in a powerful new way. It introduces a groundbreaking consensus mechanism called merit caching. This enables Meros to be both feeless and instant while maintaining the same level of integrity of traditional networks like Bitcoin. To find out how you can participate in the future of crypto payments, go to meroscrypto.io now.
Hello and welcome to the April edition of State of the Project Meros. Now, this is a monthly podcast in which we speak to people behind the Meros project and find out exactly how things are going. This is one of the earlier editions. This is the April edition, and we started in January. And the project has not yet been released, so we're finding out how things are going during the production stage and during the development stage. Joining me today for this podcast is none other than Kayaba, who is the lead developer. Kayaba, how are you?
Great, thanks for asking. Very excited to be back as always.
Excellent, and I'm delighted to have you with us. I'm just going to jump straight into it. I've been looking at the GitHub over the past month. There's been numerous updates, most of which mean absolutely nothing to me or any other non-developer. But what I have noticed is that it does seem like all of the work in GitHub has now moved over to DB, which is the database. Now, could you tell us a little bit more about the Meros database and how you found putting this part of Meros together?
So we've been doing our work on a branch of the Meros repository called Database. I think there was like one or two initial comments, nothing breaking, of course, on our master branch. But when we do a major haul like this, where code isn't going to be broken for weeks, we do try to use a new branch because we want people to be able to download Meros and be able to test it. So we're still working on getting 100% good habits in place with Git. That's actually my fault there. I'm just still working on really making sure that everything's okay across the board. But I've been putting all the DB commits on DB branch just to make sure master isn't broken. And really, we're just finally integrating a database. Previously with Meros, you could start up the node, you could sync stuff, and it would work. You could create transactions, so on and so on. And we've talked about this before. But when you shut off the node, that was it. When you boot it back up, you would have to resync the entire network. And of course, that isn't acceptable for a cryptocurrency. And this is actually one of the things we've noted in our testnets, that we really have to get this worked on. So we spent a few weeks, and the code on that branch does compile. When I say broken, I don't mean flat out doesn't compile, broken for weeks, or at least not in this case. What I mean is that if you were to do it right now, you could still sync the network. But after you shut down the node, if you turned your node back on, it wouldn't be in the same state. So you'd have to delete your database to get back up and running. So it's broken from a effects standpoint, not from like a code standpoint. So yeah, we've just been working on getting the database integrated. We're using LMDB, which is the same database used by some other coins like Monero. And honestly, it's been going well. It's just taking a while because it's just a really big thing.
It's interesting that you said that you'll be using LMDB. How did you come to the decision to use that particular database? And how are you finding it?
So with databases, we were looking at embedded databases. That means you don't actually have to download and set up a database on your system, like SQL or MySQL specifically. Really any SQL database. But it's actually in the program itself. So Bitcoin uses one called Berkeley, and it is noted for being slow and not optimal. And there's actually been pushes within the Bitcoin community, although none have succeeded, to update Bitcoin Core to use Level. That's another database. But since Level is either no longer maintained or so sporadically updated, it's kind of dead. Another group forked it. I believe Facebook is actually behind this fork, and they created RocksDB. So we were originally going to use RocksDB. And I found that, yes, because people in Bitcoin wanted to switch to Level because it was better than Berkeley, and then Rocks is the successor to Level. But it was really annoying how many configuration options it had. And really, those configuration options are great. You can truly fine-tune it. The issue is that you have to fine-tune it. It doesn't have any default settings, or you really just have to spend a lot of time and effort. You can't really, at our point where we don't actually have a live network, we don't have a running blockchain or transactions, it's very hard to see what settings would be best. And yes, we could fine-tune it over time, but with LMDB, it's much simpler. There really aren't any config options. And it is noted to be faster, with RocksDB only winning in a few edge cases. But we felt confident that LMDB would be the faster option for us. And then beyond that, LMDB doesn't have a cache, which means with RocksDB, if you're accessing something frequently, it will actually store it in RAM so you can get access to it faster. With LMDB, everything's on the disk. It doesn't try to buffer anything in RAM. So LMDB is slower in that sense. That said, we were planning from the start to provide our own cache, our own amount of objects in RAM for faster access. So that's not a concern for us.
Awesome. That is very interesting. It's always fascinating to me when you do go into that detail, the amount of detail that you actually have to go into for these specific parts of Meros. That is really quite interesting to me. I wanted to move on really and speak about something which happened generally within the crypto sphere within the last month that I wanted to get your opinion on as it relates to, or in relation to Meros. And that is that another project, they had a bug bounty program, and the bug bounty was actually ignored. And the person who would have put forward the exploit to get the bounty instead decided to attack the network. Now, after he'd attacked the network and taken the money that he wanted to take, or taken the tokens that he wanted to take, he then said the reason why he didn't use the bug bounty was because it forced him to surrender his anonymity, and he didn't want to do that. Now, how do you feel about bug bounties, and will Meros be using a bug bounty? If so, will you take things like anonymity into account when setting the parameters for which people can claim a bounty?
So we definitely want to have a bug bounty, and we likely won't go through any of the big systems like HackerOne or so on, just because we're going to be offering the pre-mine and we don't need such a system. So we do want to offer a bug bounty before launch, because it's worse to find a bug after launch rather than before. The reason why we haven't started a program yet is because there are bugs. If you go on our GitHub issues right now, there's a few bugs, even some critical, which could be exploited. The network's definitely not ready to go live yet, and while those bugs will be fixed, all the critical bugs are planned to be fixed before our next testnet. They still have yet to, and I'm sure there's a couple others out there. So that's one of the reasons why we're trying to write such extensive tests and make sure everything's okay, and trying to get an audit done before mainnet. So we do plan on having one. It will likely start before the mainnet, and it will be of the Meros pre-mine. That's our plan for our bug bounty. And no, we will not force you to give up your anonymity if you want to remain anonymous. You just submit the bug, provide an address, and if it meets our requirements, we'll send you some Meros.
Okay, I think with the bigger companies like HackerOne, it was actually HackerOne I was talking about, which this exploiter decided to ignore. With the bigger projects like HackerOne, I believe the reason why they have to get someone's name and address is, I think it's either for tax purposes or something along those lines to prove that they have actually paid somebody and keep a record of it. I don't know if you envision that to be an issue or not, but it does bring me on nicely to my next question, which is about Meros Works. Now, how is Meros Works coming along? Can you tell us a little bit more about the legal steps that you've had to go through to make sure that this vital part of Meros is set up correctly?
So Meros Works are business end, just in case anyone who's listening doesn't understand what it is. It's a business that I'm setting up myself, and it is going to receive 50% of the pre-mine, and it is going to try to provide services around Meros and also be a single official party for groups like exchanges to talk to, because some are fine talking with whoever is the dev team at that moment or the most popular dev, because some don't even have official dev teams, but some truly do require a company. So Meros Works is going to be American C Corp likely, and it is going to collect 50% of the pre-mine, offer services, and be a talking point if exchanges require a company. So that's been going well. We're filing for the business now. We're really getting things done. That said, I do want to make a correction. You said Meros Works would be vital. In Meros Works, I do truly believe will be a great thing for Meros. It's not going to have the copyright. It's not going to have the trademark. If the Meros community disagrees, Meros Works won't get its way and bulldoze. No, Meros Works won't be in control. So it will help out, and I definitely think it will help. But even if Meros Works failed, I'm still going to be here for Meros, and I'm still going to be developing it as a community developer. So yeah. I see. We've just been focusing on finishing up our filing and checking with the SEC for any filings we need to do there.
That is quite interesting, because generally, I guess, when there is a company behind a blockchain, people do kind of assume that that company then controls the blockchain. And what you're saying is that Meros Works will not be controlling Meros. Meros will be effectively controlling itself, and Meros Works will be complementing. Would probably be a better description than be vital. It would be more of a complementary role. Is that better? Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so my next question is, it does speak back to databases, I guess, but the tri-weekly update, that we did have a bi-weekly update, which was available on Medium, and it still is available on Medium. For anybody who is interested, I'll make sure to put the link in the description. And this bi-weekly update has now been moved to a tri-weekly update. Now, the tri-weekly update did seem lighter than previous updates. Like, there were less different things being added. Now, is this because you're now moving into the real meaty part of developing Meros, where there's less individual smaller things happening and more bigger things that are taking a lot longer to actually get achieved? Would that be accurate?
I personally think we've been working on the meaty part for months now. I mean, we don't really have a quality GUI according to the public. I want to show it off to my grandma, of course. But we've been working on getting transactions working. We've been working on getting mining working, the chain. So I really think previously what we've been doing is the meaty part. That said, what we have been working on the past few weeks, and I do want to comment real quick. I think it's kind of ironic that our first tri-weekly update is smaller than most of our other updates, which have been bi-weekly. So really, it's because we've been working on the database for the past few weeks, and that's a singular meaty part. And it's really hard to make that into something that you can put into an update. Because you can say, when working on the database, we've been storing stuff, but the name of the database or the code you're using or your choices, I'm not saying you can't put that into a tri-weekly update. I'm saying most people don't care. They just want to hear that progress is being made, and the techie people will want to know the specs. And I'm sure whoever listens to this podcast will enjoy our discussion about it. You know, I feel like this technical discussions that are spoken instead of read generally are handled better. But it's really just a singular meaty part that's technical and just not well written when you put it into an update. So really, you just have to kind of give the briefs of it.
Yeah, I would fully agree. When I was researching, putting my notes together for this show, and I was looking through the things that were going on in GitHub, it did scream to me that it does take away from the things that you can add in an update on Medium, because so much of it is so high level that I think if people do really want to know, they always can, and they are welcome. And it is one of the best features, I think, in the way you're developing Meros, is that people can always go to GitHub and the things will be there. If they really want that level of detail, it's still there. I was reading, mostly it seemed like you was eliminating bugs. A lot of the comments were to get rid of this bug and that bug and the other bug, but there were some other things there like epochs, which I have no idea what they are. I don't think I've even heard that term used before, and things like that. So I do actually agree that it's this databases portion has been quite meaty and quite lengthy.
So when it comes to the bugs, when I coded a lot of this database code, it was pretty hard to test it because it was through a bunch of files. It really was just in the higher levels of code. It's not like a singular function. So once I coded it, I really needed some tests because it's a critical thing. And if you shut down the node and reload it, you really have to have the same state, because else when you reboot, you're going to be connecting to effectively a different network. So that's what the tests have been. And those tests have pointed out a lot of bugs with my initial implementation. So it's not existing bugs that we fixed, although I do think one or two of those were fixed as well. It's bugs in the DB code that we created on the DB branch.
I see. We're talking about the database. Now that you're so far into it, have your earlier predictions for the speed of the database, have they been coming true? Is the database as fast as you had thought it would be?
This podcast has been brought to you by Rhubarb Media. Rhubarb Media are the branding specialists behind successful crypto projects such as PivX, Vendible, and Libertaria. The Rhubarb style is both loved and respected the world over. So if you want your project to appeal to techies and everyday users alike, give Rhubarb Media a try. You cannot possibly be disappointed. Link is in the description.
So on our initial test, we were getting, when everything was in RAM, we were getting 1,000 lattice entries per second without any consensus or anything. And that was months ago, actually. It might even be close to 6 months ago, half a year. And that was kind of my target for the cryptocurrency, because I don't think we're going to need 1,000 TPS for at least a year, maybe 2 years. Like, that's assuming we really take off. But that would be a nice target. So now that we've added consensus, or not now, that's been in there for a few months as well. But once we added that lowered the TPS a bit, though I didn't have an estimate after that. When we added in consensus, I stopped getting estimates because really it's changing. It depends on how many people are part of the network. And I couldn't really get a firm answer. And I figured we just have to do network stress tests when the time comes. So now that we've added the DB, it's going to go down as well because we're moving from RAM to a disk drive or a hard drive. And now that we're on the hard drive, our hard drive's going to be slower than RAM. And I no longer actually know what the TPS estimates are even going to be, just because I haven't bothered testing them. Really, I'm just waiting for any network to go live, and then I'm planning on testing it then. If I had to guess, I would say at best we're probably looking at 200 TPS right now. But there is something else I want to comment. We don't have a threaded node at all. Generally, with computer programs that are doing a lot of work, they'll run on multiple threads. And a thread is, if you have two threads, that means you have two things going on at once. So with our code, we do have asynchronous code, which means code that kind of runs out of order. We have our networking library working at the same time as the rest of the database. And whenever you get something over the network, that will instantly call the code, even if some other async code is running. But we're still not on threads. And until we add those in, I will admit that the node's going to be slow. The problem with adding them in is it's a lot of work. It would be even more work than adding the DB. And honestly, I would estimate it's going to take a month or two. So even though they're going to be needed for speed, at this point, I'm considering not even having threads at launch. Because even though they're going to be needed to go over 100, 200 TPS, we're not going to need that for at least a couple months after launch. And just because of the time they take, I think I'd rather focus on features and security right now.
Yeah.
Sorry for kind of getting out of the original question. There was just a lot going on there.
Well, no, that is exactly the reason why we have you on the show. If we didn't want to get into that sort of detail, I would just do it myself because I don't know all that stuff. So
they say they've been working on something called the DB. Good. So it sounds like they're working on the DB. Thank you for coming. My name's Cryptosi. Have a good night.
Exactly. Yeah. Please like and subscribe and have a good day. But also, I wanted to actually ask you about the size of the database. Now, I'm guessing you can see how big it's becoming, and then I guess multiply it by the transactions per second that you're kind of expecting to get. Do you feel that the size of the database how do you feel it will fare to, let's say, the size of the Bitcoin database? What kinds do you think it will be, bigger, smaller, and how do you think that will go?
Meros and Bitcoin are different from a consensus perspective, from how the coins agree. With Bitcoin, just to say things in simple terms, they follow the longest chain. The longest blockchain that exists, that's the valid blockchain. So that means any transaction that's in a block and that on the longest chain, that's a valid transaction. With Meros, we split it up. So you have a transaction, and then that's voted on. And then we have a blockchain that doesn't actually save those votes. So what that means is every time you create a vote, you're adding 32 bytes to the database. And then every time you're creating a transaction, you're adding, I believe, 160. It's 150 to 160. And because of that, it really depends on how many people we have participating in the consensus. If you wanted to ignore people, which would reduce network security and not be a good idea, you could probably get down, like if you're just going for the top 50% and ignoring everyone else, I would guess that maybe 7 or so people would manage to have the 50% for the first 6 months or so. So that means you could get transactions down to 380 bytes. I think on Bitcoin, they're 210, because with Bitcoin, you don't have to save any votes. You just have it on the blockchain. But with us, you have to save the transaction plus the votes. So because of our different system, we are looking at larger transactions than Bitcoin, and we're talking likely about 2 to 3 times. So honestly, that's not my favorite thing. It's really annoying to say we're going to have that higher requirement, but honestly, that's what's needed if we're looking at this higher speed. I mean, with Nano, they don't save votes, which is also a security issue with them. So they don't save votes, but their database is also large because they are instant and feeless, and there's been comments about them growing because they don't have an adjustable spam filter. If you have a high-end graphics card, you could probably grow their database by a few gigabytes a week, I think. It's just that no one's bothered to yet. So we do save votes, and we do have an adjustable spam filter. So in the name of security, we have one feature that will increase our DB size, even compared to Nano, and we have one feature that stops an attack where you grow the database size. But I would like to say I'm thankful that we're talking about our database size going up on the hard drive and not necessarily in RAM, because it is pretty cheap to get a 1 terabyte drive nowadays. I'm not saying everyone has a 1 terabyte drive. I'm saying it's not the most expensive thing in the world. But if I said you have to have 16 gigabytes of RAM, that might be a problem, where it would really kick off a lot of potential servers.
And I'm assuming that you're not expecting the database to reach 1 terabyte anytime soon.
I mean, we said transactions were 3 times as large as Bitcoin. So if we had the same amount of transactions as Bitcoin as it got over the last 9 years, we'd be talking about 480 gigabytes. And that's ignoring pruning. I mean, with Bitcoin, there were light clients called SPV clients, where they only store portions of each block. And those are very small, truly great pieces of software. With Meros, you can also achieve something similar. And beyond that, you can also just delete some parts of the database that you're not using. That said, I don't want to do that for Meros Core, or whatever you want to call the software that's currently being developed. The software we're writing is meant to be a general purpose wallet, but it's also primarily meant to be the backbone of the Meros network. And I have no incentive to add pruning or make it a light client when that would reduce network security, and I want people to run full nodes. So I would definitely like, say, Meros Works to create a light client, and I would definitely love for the community to step up and create a light client. But the Meros core software will likely never have pruning or have a light option. That'll likely be a separate piece of software. And I might be the one who's developing that. The community might. I would love to see some alternate node and wallets out there.
Yeah, interesting. As you were describing that, I think I'm quite sure I misunderstood it, but it sounded to me like you were saying that the more people that are voting, the higher the size of the transaction within the database. So does that mean that the more users that you have, the higher the transaction, or the more miners, I should say, that are securing the network, the higher the size of the transactions? Is that right? Or what have I missed there?
That is correct. And in our settings, we'll likely have an option for every node to say, like, the minimum percent they want to acknowledge. So if you mine a block and you acknowledge very small miners, that's valid. But if you're a miner, you can say, I don't want to include very small miners.
Right.
Of course, then other miners, if you set your limit too high, if you say, I don't acknowledge anything below 1%, then other miners might say you're just trying to get more rewards for yourself and get mad at you and then X you out as well. So there is a very social aspect to this as well. You know,
right, okay.
Because miners can just not mine votes from other miners. But yes, you're correct. And that's true of a lot of consensus mechanisms. That's why DPoS exists. With DPoS, a bunch of miners give out their weight to a single, or not a bunch of miners, but a bunch of voters or stakers give out their weight to a single staker who then makes decisions. But that's generally a very centralized option. So we don't want to be that centralized. So yeah, we'll likely have the community be able to set their nodes to be able to say, ignore people below X. So in that way, the miners can kind of say how centralized or decentralized they want the network. And other miners can kind of look over each other. And if one is only mining for themselves, they can say, yeah, X them out, don't mine their stuff. And as a group, kind of stop them. So yeah, it's going to be a very social aspect, but the miners are likely going to have control over centralization for a smoother performance or decentralization for a slower but more decentralized option.
Okay. And when will the average person be able to use the testnet? I know we've had the developer testnet go through, but when will you actually have binaries for a testnet so that everyone can just download it and give Meros a try? When do you predict that will be?
So we've done a developer testnet, and then we've done developer testnet 1D, which was meant to be a one-day testnet, even though I do think it took up the whole weekend, where we tested a change in our consensus mechanism to optimize it. And now I've been working on the database, and after that there are some critical bugs, and then we're going to head into developer testnet 2. After that, I'm going to spend a few weeks solving any new bugs I find and kind of cleaning up the code base. I do think the code base is pretty clean. I'm very happy with it, to be honest. But there are a couple of issues where it's not that they're, as a thing, are huge. It's just that they're all throughout the code base. And they are an ugly piece of code. So there are some things I want to clean up. And then after that cleanup, I'll work on throwing together a GUI. And then we're going to work on the first public testnet. So database plus critical bugs. Then we're heading in to developer testnet 2. Then I'm going to do a cleanup. Actually, that may be before developer testnet 2. I'm still thinking about that. Then we're fixing bugs found in developer testnet 2. Then we're going to work on a public testnet. And that public testnet will likely be alive till the end, with new iterations of the public testnet being done via hard forks.
Okay, awesome. I just wanted to kind of like change the tone a little bit and speak about an appearance that you made on a podcast for a well-known and very, very highly respected project called PivX. They had a podcast where they discussed proof of stake versus proof of work, and you was there on quite a, I want to say, star-studded panel with Alex Mashinsky, who is actually the creator of VoIP, and I think his name's Todd Blackburn, who is the owner of probably the largest Facebook crypto group that there is. And you guys spoke about proof of work versus proof of stake. How did you find that experience? And it's definitely good exposure for Meros. Would you agree?
So I'm personally not a fan of PivX, but I had a lot of fun talking with those guys, especially the creator of VoIP, because he was a very smart dude, and it was really just a great talk. And I enjoyed the discussion particularly because I feel like I had a unique position to offer, as merit caching is essentially proof of stake overlaid on top of proof of work. So I really just, a lot of fun. When it comes to the Meros side, I tried not to bring up Meros too much, to be honest. I understand it would have been a great publicity opportunity, but I don't want to be that guy that gets invited to something and then just shouts about his own thing the entire time. I was invited on to talk about proof of work versus proof of stake, and that's what I did. I wasn't invited on to talk about Meros or merit caching, so I tried to keep that out of it.
Yeah, you actually done quite well. I believe Alex spoke about his project, although I can't remember what it was, but I'm quite sure he did. But yeah, I did tune in and I thought it was good. What I'll actually do, I'll probably, if anybody is interested, I'll probably put the link in the description so they can watch you speak and see that you actually speak quite well, even when you've not got me with you to help you look good. You still managed to do quite a good job of speaking for yourself. Kayaba, it's been absolutely awesome having you on the podcast again, as usual. Before you go, is there anything in particular that's going to be worked on within this next month for Meros that people should know about?
So we're going to finish up the database. We're likely going to make the move to RandomX. We are currently using Argon, and when we selected that algorithm 9 months ago, to think Meros has been in development for 9 months now. Mm-hmm. When we selected it that long ago, it was a CPU-only algorithm, but now there are GPU implementations available with quality speed. So we're going to be moving likely to RandomX. Although there is another algorithm that I've been considering. It's actually one built by a friend of mine that's been very promising in tests. So we are looking into that, but he hasn't run GPU tests on that, and I am committed to providing a CPU-only mining experience. So we'll likely make the move to RandomX, maybe do a bit of cleanup because we also have to fix those critical bugs, and one of them is best fixed via cleanup. And really, it's just going to be preparation for the next testnet.
Awesome. Kayaba, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely excellent. I'm looking forward already to next month's podcast. I've already got a few questions in my mind that I'm immediately going to add to my notes for that podcast. So thank you very much for your time. For everybody who's listening, also thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're on, whether it's iTunes, Spotify or YouTube. Please like and subscribe, and we look forward to catching up with you on what will be the May update now next month. So Kayaba, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex. And for more information, go to www.pivex.org.